finishing up this series today that we've been in called For the Win, and we're looking for our win in 2019. We talked about finding the win for the church, the Big C church, for our church. We talked last week about finding the win in our faith. And today I want to get super, super practical. And I say that frequently, but it's because I truly believe that this is the most practical book there is. We just put a very spiritual spin on it, right? We take the practical things in here and we apply them to our life. We put this spiritual, applicable word. Every word in this book applies to our life. And I think that a lot of it is very, very practical. Today is probably going to be as practical as I get. Here's what we're talking about today. We're talking about finding our win in our work. Okay, it's not faith. It's not, spiritual. It's our work. The work that we do, the job that we do. I believe that with our work, in our work, it can be rewarding, but our work can also be part of our calling. I believe that our work is supposed to be part of our calling. And I'll get into that more in a minute. A lot of times when it comes to our faith, whether you are a believer, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, what happens is we take our faith and we take the day-to-day stuff and we usually keep them separate. We compartmentalize the two, and very rarely do they cross lines, our faith and our work life. And maybe if you're really, really into this Jesus thing, you allow your faith to maybe penetrate your marriage. You allow it to maybe if you're really into it, you allow it to move into your finances. Maybe you allow your faith to dictate how you parent your kid. You bring your kids to church, so you're letting faith get into your parenting. But when it really comes down to it, when it comes down to the day-to-day stuff, right? The stuff that maybe we don't even think about our faith being a part of, usually what happens is we separate the two. We compartmentalize the two things. As a student ministries pastor for 10 years, I think that my anthem was constantly about getting Jesus into the school. You talk to teenagers and your big mission is to get Jesus into the schools. So my job would be to get Jesus into the kids and get the kids into the schools. And we do that, and we try and get as many people to Jesus because statistically, 70% of kids leave church after high school. Statistically. That's not opinion. That's not pastor talk. The facts are that 70% of kids quit going to church after high school. Side note, parents, get your kids in church. Ground your kids in church. Ground your kids in the faith because your kids are fighting an uphill battle, and your job is to equip them with the tools to fight that battle. Right? Right, parents? So here's the thing. For as a youth pastor, it was constantly get your kids in church, get your kids into school with Jesus, take Jesus into the school. And then you would kind of sit back and you watch and you hope that they're doing it. You hope that those lines are crossing. And maybe they occasionally did, but kids at school are harsh and we're afraid of other kids, right? And so you put as much into them as you possibly can, and you hope that you get them on the right track. And then we leave school, and all of a sudden everything's better because we don't have to do that. But then we find out that the real world is so much more harsh on our faith than high school kids ever would be or could be. The people in our work, the people that we encounter every day, the people in TV and me, it's so much more harsh in our faith than it ever could have been in school. And so what we do is we compartmentalize these things and we separate them, and we don't allow our faith to be a part of the real life stuff, the day-to-day stuff, our work life. It's interesting because we never actually see this happen in Scripture. We never see the two split apart. We never see these two elements, major elements of our life, separated. In fact, work is significant in Scripture, and it's part of our purpose. I said earlier, it's part of our calling. At the very, very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, it says this. It says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. One of the first things that God does ever is give Adam a job. I mean, we're talking about work today, right? The first thing that God does is become an employer. And he employs Adam to be the gardener for the coolest garden in the world. The trees are supernatural, Talk about a job. First thing that God ever does is give Adam a job. And please understand before we get too far into this, I know that there are times in our lives where maybe we don't work. Maybe it's not possible to work. We don't have a job. We're out of work. Maybe we're retired, right? I think that's what we're all working for anyway, right? The long weekend. Maybe you're not in work. Maybe you don't have a job. Whatever that might be, I think that we are wired for work. And maybe it's not necessarily a 9-to-5 job. It's just work as a whole. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. There's a gift that comes from God that allows us to look back on our toil and be pleased with it. Our toil is our extremely hard work. God has given us this gift of pride in the work that we do. One of my favorite accounts on Instagram is from this guy called The Dad, okay? You'll get it in a minute. This guy, his name is The Dad. That's his most, it's just this guy on the internet who's garnered 817,000 followers simply by posting a whole bunch of cliche things about dads. And I stumbled upon this, and as a father, I realized that almost all of them are true. It's really, really sad. Do you ever catch yourself in those modes as parents, moms, or dads, and you're saying, man, that is exactly what dads do, or that's exactly, like, man, you are so your mom, you know what I mean? Like we have these cliche things that we get into, and the dad, I'm sure he has a name, but all I know him is the dad, and I call him that when I write him messages. So this guy, he posts this thing on, there you go. He posted this thing the other day online, and what it was a description of all the things that dads would rather set aside to simply stand in our front yard with our hands on our hip and admire our front lawn. You know what I'm talking about? Like, dads, do you do that? I've realized how cliche it is and how true it is. It's stereotypical dad, and it is great. There's nothing better than admiring your lawn. Right now, my lawn is not admirable, and so I actually have that face when I look at it. The cool thing about work is, you can take that crazy picture down. The cool thing about work is that God designed us to do it, and he allows us to find pleasure in it. We can look at the work that we've done, whether it be your lawn or your job, your kids, whatever you've built your family to be, and God allows us to look back on it and be pleased and be proud of it and find joy in it, so long as we are putting into the things that we want to get back. So long as we're putting as much into it that we want to get back from it. Colossians chapter 3 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. Whatever you put your hands to. And I don't know what your employment history looks like. I don't know if you are employed, unemployed, on disability, retired, rehired. I don't know if you're riding the coattails of your parents. Whatever that, ride that as long as you can. Whatever that might be, Paul writes in Colossians, whatever you do, do it as if unto the Lord. Do it as if every single minute of the work that you're doing is for God. If you type on a keyboard for 40 hours a week, do it as if unto the Lord. If you call people during dinner time and try and get them to adjust their long-distance calling plan, do it as if unto the Lord, right? If you watch your kids for 168 hours a week, do it as if unto the Lord. The work that you do it unto the Lord. Why? Paul goes on and he says that we'll receive an inheritance from the Lord. It's the Lord we're serving in the work that we do, whatever that work is. The problem when we're looking for the win in our work is that a lot of times it doesn't feel like we're winning, it feels like we're losing. It feels like the work that we're doing does not give us pride, it doesn't give us joy, it gives us the exact opposite of joy. I think it can feel like this because, number one, in your notes, what we're doing is a bad fit. What we're doing, have you ever had a job that's a bad fit? You know what I'm talking about? Now listen, if you are a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, this doesn't apply to you. I know that that's a job too, a much more detailed job, but this does not apply to you. If it's a bad fit, get over it. But sometimes we do a job, and at the end of the day, it's just not a good fit for us. Maturity is us being able to identify that it's not a good fit without demeaning anyone or bringing anyone down in the process. I ran across this resignation letter the other day from this fellow named Todd. Throw that up for me. The outside says, sorry for your loss. The inside says, it's me. I leave in 3 weeks. Todd. I cannot wait until I resign this position because I'm going to do that. It's me, right? Who's Todd? We don't have to burn the ship to the ground, right? Sometimes it's not a good fit, and maturity is us understanding that it's not a good fit, and sometimes we move along. And the reality is it's never too late for us to become who we want to be or who we're supposed to be in the first place. My mom is a staunch believer that I can still become an astronaut when I'm ready. I'm not joking. She is. I've had very long discussions with her for encouragement. Go be an astronaut. I said, no, Mom, I choose Castle Rock. It's a choice. I could do it if I wanted. Here's number 2. Sometimes it feels like we're losing our work because of difficult people. Difficult people make life difficult, right? Difficult people make life hard. That's not a secret. I think we've all been in a position where there are people in our lives that make life harder at work, at home, literally anywhere that we encounter people. There are difficult people that make life hard. The key to having difficult people is knowing our position with them. The key to dealing with difficult people is knowing how to handle the situation in a way that allows us to look like Christ. I think that we have to have a strong understanding that people are people and people have flaws. Those difficult people, they have flaws in their life, just like you and me. And we have to begin to understand that. Don't compromise your character because of someone else's character flaws. Instead, do your job better. Be the best that you can be. Be the best at your job. Here's the third thing. Sometimes it feels like we're losing because of low reward. You ever had a job that didn't pay very well? A couple of you. Some of you are like, no, I make tons of money. A few years ago, I went to do this interview at this church, and we go to this interview, and it's like 4 or 5 day long interview, and everything was syncing up in this interview. It felt great. Like everything was good. The pastor was great, and the people were great, and the church was great, and it was a youth ministry position. The youth ministry was incredible, and I preached like and it was good, right? It was good, and everything was lining up in this interview. And we get to the end of it. We're sitting in the pastor's living room, and he offers us the job. And then he tells me the salary. And it was a $13,000 pay decrease from what I was previously making. And don't get me wrong, ministry is not about the money, but for some reason, my kids like to eat. And we had a couple of them, and they would not have been able to. And so we declined this job, and of course, like a week later, the pastor had done some research and calls me profusely apologizing for slapping me in the face. And we took the job, and it was every bit of as awesome as we thought it was going to be. But sometimes in the work that we do, the reward is low, and it's not even always financial. Relationships are built through our workplace and the work that we do, and sometimes we're not pulling in these relationships that we need to pull in, that we should have. It affects our relationships, and it kind of sucks everything away from them. The reward is not always financial. Sometimes it comes in the form of relationships. Sometimes it comes in the form of how it affects our family. Sometimes it comes in the form of how it affects our future. The reward that we get from the work that we do, sometimes it affects the way that we feel just when we get home at the end of the day. If we feel really, really bad every single day at 5:30 when we get home, maybe it's time to change something. Maybe it's time to fix something. If those things are affecting negatively, I think that we owe it to ourselves to maybe reevaluate some things. And please hear me, don't quit your job tomorrow. I'm serious. Well, the pastor said it. Todd. Don't quit your job tomorrow, but maybe it can be a time where we start to reevaluate some things. Maybe we learn to understand some new things about our job or gain new perspectives on the way that we view things. It leads us to number 4. Sometimes we feel like we're losing because we have unrealistic expectations. We expect our lives to look like the lives that are portrayed in TV and movies and social media, and really it puts us at this unfair advantage. Because life will almost never look like the lives on TV and movies and social media. There is a good chance that you won't always enjoy the things that you do. I love the work I do. I love it. You are the best. But there are things that I don't like in the work that I do. It's part of it. Takes us to the last one. I think that something that we maybe don't consider as frequently in the effect that it has on our work life or why we feel like we're losing. But number 5, it's a compromised faith. It's a compromised faith. You may come to work and find so much success, but if you compromise your faith in the middle of that, we will never feel as fulfilled as we need to be. Simply put, you won't feel like you have the win. So here's the big question. How do I succeed at work and honor God? If you have a Bible, flip it open to Daniel chapter 1. If you don't, of course, it's in your notes and on the screens behind me. Daniel chapter 1. Daniel was a follower of God. He was a hero in the faith. He honored God. He loved God. And much like most of us, Daniel found himself in this situation that was bigger than himself. And really the situation that Daniel was in was out of his control. Daniel could not control the situation that he was in. He was part of this nation called Israel, and Israel had been conquered by this other nation called Babylon, and Babylon took in the Israelites, and they forced them to work, but God told them to integrate into their culture, and so they begin to integrate into the Babylon culture, and that's where we kind of pick up in Daniel chapter 1. It says this, it says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians." It sounds really good in the NIV. Here's what the Message translation says. It says that he was to bring in good prospects for leadership and government, perfect specimens, and indoctrinate them into language, magic, and fortune telling. It goes on, it says the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. So Daniel does not choose his job chooses him. He's brought into this, and it seems like a sweet gig because Daniel is brought in as nobility from Israel. And the king is like, okay, I'm going to elevate these people. I want people that are good for government and good for leadership. Babylon is taking in this culture as much as the Israelites are having to bleed into this culture. The problem with it is that this culture was in direct opposition of the faith that Daniel and the Israelites had. And the king said that he would feed them off of his own table. The problem is that it was in direct conflict with the Israelite culture. The food even was in direct conflict. God had instructed the Israelites to get into Babylon and become part of their culture, but then this food thing comes along, and it was in conflict with the way that Daniel believed, because they used this food in pagan worship. It was not part of their religion, and so they were not going to eat this food. Look at that in a minute. It goes on in verse 4. It says, they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. You will recognize the other 3 because they eventually became Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's a different story. We won't get that. So culture clashes, and Daniel faces this difficulty in the work that he's been given, and yet still we're looking for the win in Daniel's job. In the job that Daniel has, in the job that was given to Daniel. He moves to this new country, and he doesn't fight it, probably because he can't. He doesn't fight learning about Babylon. He makes his adaptations to his environment because God had instructed them to do so. And still he stands his ground in some of those areas. Daniel is one of my favorite characters in the Bible because he's handed this lot. And really at the end of the day, it was what it was. Like, it just is what it is. Like, he had to do it. There's no getting around it. And I love that he takes it and he turns something out of it. He couldn't do anything with this this life that he had been given, but he found a way to remain who he was despite the situation that he was in. And we're talking about work this morning. We're talking about maybe you're sitting here and you think, man, I love my job. I make billions. If you make billions, let's talk after service. I love my job. Everything about it's great. It's a flawless job. Thank God for that. Thank God that we have jobs that we work, that we love, and we feel blessed from and feel pride from. Please hear me. This is applicable to you. This is not just for the person that hates their work. I think it still applies. How do we find our win in the work that we do? I've got 4 thoughts for you. The first one is this. I think that we have to look for excellence. I think in the work that we do, we have to look for excellence. I love the concept of excellence. When I was in Bible college, I was going to this church in Springfield, Missouri. And I was sitting in this church service, and for as much as I hate it, I understand that you don't remember everything that I say as your preacher. I think you need to work on it. But I understand that some of you won't remember what I talked about today next week. That's okay, because I'll talk again next week. But I'm sitting in this message, and I remember 2 messages from this pastor at this church in Springfield. I remember 2 messages. One of them, he gets on stage and he's preaching, and he cursed twice in his message. And I was like, what? It was for shock value, and it worked because I was shocked. His second message was this. He's preaching on excellence, and he turns to all the Bible school kids in the room. And Springfield, Missouri is like the hub for Bible school students, right? So there's a bunch of us, and we're all training to be, pastors and missionaries and in ministry in some form. And he looks at us in this message, and he says, in your schoolwork, if you are not striving for excellence, you're cheating someone out of the future work that God has called you to do. And it stuck with me far past biology and hermeneutics. It stuck with me because we're all on this track, this mission, this job that God has called us to. So why in the world would we do any of it without excellence? Every single thing that God has called us to do, we should be doing with excellence. Everything that we are doing outside of the things that God has called us to do, we should be doing with excellence. It took me kind of a while for this to sink in and become part of my life, but I eventually realized and understood that excellence does not and will not ever mean perfection. Excellence doesn't mean perfection. What excellence does mean is that we're striving for our absolute best. In the work that we do, we should be striving for our very best. Are you with me? And see, the reality of it is so much of us spend most of our time working in our work that we never work on our work. We never take a step back and figure out how to do our work better. Proverbs 22 says, do you see someone skilled in their work? They'll serve before kings. Let me put it in other words, if you're not faithful where you're at, then you're never going to get to where you want to be. See, I think that when we find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be, whether it's in work, whether it's at home, whether it's in our marriage, when we find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be, the thing that needs to change is us. Usually, we don't get to change the situation. We don't get to change the way that our employers look at us or talk to us. All we can do is change us. What's so cool about Daniel is Daniel followed this plan. And it was this plan that ultimately led to something incredible, and it was a plan that God continued to unfold in front of Daniel. It says in chapter 2, the king placed Daniel in a high position. Later on in chapter 5, he's promoted again. He says he was proclaimed the 3rd highest ruler of the kingdom. Daniel is an outsider being brought into a culture that he didn't agree with, and he eventually becomes the 3rd highest person in their entire kingdom. There is this holy ambition that honors God. And I think that when we strive to win in excellence and with excellence, our holy ambition doesn't hurt us in the outside world. Our holy ambition doesn't knock us down in the outside world because there's purpose behind it. I think that we have to begin to rescue holy ambition because it holds so much more value than an unholy ambition. The reward from a holy ambition is so much greater and will always exceed the reward of moving outside of that. Does that make sense? Does it? You're quiet. You're blank today. This is good, though. I'll preach it again next week. Really sink it in. We're starting a new series in 2 weeks. I don't know. Excellence moves us away from this line in the sand that's drawn. And on one side of the line is sin, and on the other side is this holy ambition. And so much of the time we spend our lives seeing how close we can get to this line without going over. Excellence keeps pushing us away from the line, further from the line, and closer to where God wants us to be. Daniel 6 says they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. Move into an atmosphere of striving to be the best that you can be. Here's number 2. I'll be quick. I know we're running out of time. Number 2 is integrity. Integrity is not being self-righteous, it's being self-regulated. Daniel made this decision in the privacy of his own home and his own heart. In chapter 1 it says, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine. In other words, he's gonna live this life that he was put into, but he's gonna reinvent himself while allowing God to put this path in front of him. I'm going to live this life, but I'm going to have to change some things about it so that I can still stay in line with God and still be elevated to the position that they want me to be in. So frequently in church, we look at the word integrity and we only consider one definition of it. To be men and women of integrity, right? Moral uprightness, to have these strong moral principles. But I love the second definition of it. The dictionary says it's this state of being whole or undivided. I love that integrity is being undivided. When we live in integrity, we don't get to play both sides of the fence. We don't get to have work Todd and church Todd. Okay, if your name is Todd, I sincerely apologize. If you know a Todd, please don't condemn him. He did nothing wrong. We don't get to play both sides of the fence. But much like in excellence, integrity is not this state of being perfect. It's a state of choosing to go all in on one thing. Undivided. No matter the occasion, in your faith, in your church, in your job, in your home life, in your marriage, and when you're alone and nobody's watching, you are the same all the time. You're undivided. Number 3 is this. How do we find our win and work? We play nice. We play nice. There's this book called High Maintenance Relationships, and it outlines some relationships and people and characteristics in people. I'm going to read a few of them to you. First one is the critic. Maybe you know some of these people. The critic. The critic is complaining, nagging, giving unwanted advice. Anybody know anybody like that? I know someone. It's not me. The martyr, always racked with self-pity. No one notices what I do. They feel underappreciated. There tends to be something upsetting in their life all the time. There's the wet blanket. They're pessimistic, automatically negative. Even when they try to be positive, they're negative. Man, it's a beautiful day out. Only I got to enjoy it. You know those people? The superstar, they have to be the center of attention. The green-eyed monster, they're soaked in envy. The sponge, they soak up all the emotional energy in the room. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, who do we identify with? Because really, it doesn't matter how we identify anybody else. Because if you can identify them like that, everybody else can too. How do we identify ourselves? If we look at this list, are we any of these people? In our home, we always say that if you can't find that person in the room, you're probably that person. You know? If I can't find the wet blanket, there's a good chance I'm the wet blanket. I don't think that we have to walk around life with this chip on our shoulder. I don't think that we have to always be so insecure about what people think, but I do think that we move into these relationships and we have these characteristics in them. And really what they do is we gain these character flaws. Nobody wants to be with us. And we have to begin to be self-aware enough to know that that's not who God intended us to be and begin to move away from those character flaws. Here's number 4. How do we win in our work this year? We begin to see our work as a mission. I think you have to begin to see our work as a mission. In the book of Esther, she's elevated to this royal position, and it says this, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. For such a time as this. Whether you just started at the company or you started the company, I believe that God drops us into these positions of leadership with intention. Right? There's that word again, with intention. I believe that God drops us into these positions of leadership no matter where on the food chain we fall. He puts us in these leadership positions with intention of a bigger plan. You are where you're at for such a time as this. It might be a bad fit, but God's got something for you there. You may have low reward, but God has something there for you. The goal is to be exactly who you are without compromising who you're supposed to be. The truth is that God puts opportunities in front of us every single day, ways for us to be able to do the work that He has called us to do. That's the mission. Your work is a mission field. View it as a mission field. What is a mission field? It's a place that you go every single day and are surrounded by people that need to see the Jesus in you. There are people that you encounter every single day that need to see the Jesus in you. That's the mission field. Stop compromising and compartmentalizing your faith, because there are people all around us that need to see it in you. We hold something incredible in our hands, and people need to see it. You should be the same person here that you are out there. And if you're too close to the line, start backing away. Amen? Come on, pray with me.